I had paid approximately $10,000 in living expenses for them secretly, without asking for anything in return, and without ever mentioning it. What about her? Has she ever had to make a sacrifice or beg for help? Or did she arrive, smile pretty, and make an impact in a lovely dress while holding a successful boyfriend? I was not asking to keep score. I was asking because, for the first time, I noticed that fairness was never considered in this household. I'd grown accustomed to standing on the sidelines since I was a child. In family photos, I was frequently partially hidden behind someone else or captured at the edge of the frame. I wasn't exactly gazing at the camera. Nobody ever told me to step aside, but I always did. Jessica was at the center of every important event in our family, from birthdays and graduations to her breakups. There was always a reason for everyone to band together, console, and celebrate her. I can't recall the last time somebody inquired if I was okay. Jessica is 2 years older than me, but the difference between us was never about age. She was the hope, the future-oriented child that our parents proudly mentioned when relatives visited. And me? In the same talks, if I was mentioned at all, it was as a short footnote. Ryan. Oh, he's fine. I believe he works in technology. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, remained out of trouble, and quietly handled everything, they'd eventually see me. However, they didn't. It turns out that when you're used to being invisible, nobody notices when you leave. I began covering my parents' utility costs, electricity, water, and internet, nearly 2 years ago. My mother called first, and everything started there. That day, she moaned about how the cost of living had risen, how this month's bills had unexpectedly increased, and how their retirement income was no longer sufficient. Then, gently and hesitantly, she said, "If you could help us even a little, it would mean a lot." I agreed. At the time, I assumed it would be only a few months until things settled down. However, the months that followed looked precisely like the previous one. Nobody mentioned terminating it, and there was no backup plan. Every now and then, I'd ask, "Is Jessica helping out at all, Mom?" She'd always evade the topic. Sometimes she'd say, "Just help us this month, your sister will pitch in next time." Other times, "Your sister's covering Dad's medical stuff, that's not easy either." I heard those lines so many times I could recite them by heart, and I just smiled and let it go every time, because I knew none of it was true. So I kept sending the money, nearly $400 per month, reliably and quietly, without complaint. Nobody mentioned it. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was simply that I felt it was the correct thing to do. I used to think that if I was quiet and responsible enough, they would notice. But today, after everything, they look at me and say, I'm the family's shame. After a time, everything around me was silent, and I just sat there, paralyzed on the couch. I still had my phone in my hand. I wasn't angry or heartbroken anymore. There was only one clear emotion sitting in my chest, something like, that's enough. Following that, I opened my banking app. I scrolled down to the automatic payments section, where I had set up monthly transfers to cover my parents' expenses for power, water, and internet. I tapped into each thing one by one and canceled them without hesitation. I did it softly, not to avenge myself, but to preserve the one thing I still had. A semblance of self-esteem, the only thing they hadn't taken away from me. About a week later, I received the first message from my mother, in the same soothing tone she always used. There was no mention of what had happened, nor was there an apology. I just got a notice that the internet bill is due. Can you take care of it? I read the message, glanced at the screen for a time, and then placed the phone down without responding. Not because I was attempting to make a statement, but because, after all, the first thing they thought to say was a request. Pay the internet bill. There was no, are you okay? Or even a basic, can we talk? So I remained silent, and that silence, to me, said everything. 2 weeks later, my father called. The phone rang a few times before stopping. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, he left a voicemail. His tone was sharp and impatient, as it usually had been. The power company called. This month's bill hasn't been paid. What's going on? There was no worry, no mention of what he said the day I called to say I'd be home for Mom's birthday. I listened to the message, then turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. And just like that, I remained silent until my mother's birthday. My mother's birthday was around 3 weeks after my father advised me not to come home. The party went on as normal, with her favorite roasted chicken, cake from her favorite bakery, and a few close relatives gathering around the dinner table. Except for me, everything had been meticulously planned and executed. That afternoon, at precisely 4 p.m., I was sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when my phone chimed. It was my mother calling. I gazed at her name on the screen for a few seconds before putting the phone down.